And here's a building I've wanted to see for a long time. This is the Pantheon, which I think is one of the most important buildings in the world. This is an authentic Roman temple, built under direction of Hadrian in the year 118 AD. This temple to all the Roman gods has unparalleled architectural heritage, and is definitely one of the prime examples of classical architecture, with lots of Greek and Roman innovations, especially its vast dome. It is definitely one of the best preserved ancient buildings here in Rome. Later on, Christians thought that the Pantheon was possessed by demons, so it was turned into a church. The tombs of some historical figures are in there, like Raphael and Victor Emmanuel II. The towering portico of the Pantheon is incredible. The Pantheon served as a major inspiration for the American architect Thomas Jefferson. Of course, he did some other stuff as well. His design for the library at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia, and many other great buildings and monuments around the world were based on this structure, including the Thomas Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. I was really hoping I would have a chance to get in there, but they have stopped letting people in for the day, so that is very disappointing. However, on my next visit, the almighty Pantheon will be a top priority. Still, it is amazing to see in person. This is the Elephant and Obelisk. A stone-carved elephant holds up the smallest of the 12 authentic Egyptian obelisks brought to Rome by the Emperor Diocletian. Next to the elephant obelisk is the historic Hotel Minerva. Several famous people stayed here, such as Jose de San Martin, the liberator of Argentina, Chile, and Peru. This site is known as the Largo de Torre Argentina. This grouping of ancient Roman ruins are quite important. These are the remains of 4 different temples from the Republic era that were only discovered in the 1920s. This was the site of the Curia of Pompeii, where Julius Caesar was assassinated. On March 15th, the Ides of March, in the year 44 BC, the legendary dictator of the Roman Republic, who was extremely popular among the Roman people, walked up to the portico of the theater where a Senate meeting was going to be held. Little did he know that a conspiracy involving nearly 60 senators, including Marcus Brutus, were waiting with knives drawn. They attacked Julius Caesar, stabbing him to death, ending his dictatorship, but unleashing a whole new world of problems and chaos in Rome. In Shakespeare's version of this incident, Julius Caesar reportedly said, "Et tu, Brute?" seeing that his friend was involved in the assassination. I believe that circular structure with the columns was part of the Curia, so that is part of the building where the infamous assassination took place. This is pretty cool to see. The Torre Argentina is now a cat sanctuary. The site of one of history's most famous assassinations is now a hangout spot for local feral cats, who are cared for here. I believe there's a shelter nearby. I did find a few cats laying on some ancient Roman ruins, which is amazing. Now I have one more location planned for this evening. This is the Piazza Navona, one of the most beautiful squares in Rome. The Piazza Navona was the site of the Circus Agonalis, a stadium built by Domitian. This square was built in the shape of the stadium, so ancient Roman athletic competitions were held on these grounds. Later on in the 15th century, it was developed into the magnificent piazza with some incredible Baroque architecture. At its center is the Fontana dei Quattro Fiumi, designed by Bernini, and topped with a copy of an Egyptian obelisk. This fountain features 4 statues of gods, representing the 4 great rivers of the 4 continents, known back then. This god represents the Danube here in Europe. The others represent the Nile in Africa, the Ganges in Asia, and the Rio de la Plata in South America. Behind the Fountain of the 4 Rivers is Sant'Agnese in Agone. It is believed to have been built on the site where the young virgin Saint Agnes was martyred here at the stadium for refusing to marry a pagan. There are 2 smaller fountains on both ends of the Piazza Navona. This one is the Fontana del Moro, or the Moor Fountain. At the center is a sculpture of a Moor, though he looks more like Neptune considering all the surrounding aquatic statuary. Here on the other end of the Piazza Navona is the Fountain of Neptune, the Fontana del Nettuno, that is confirmed to be Neptune at its center. This fountain was designed in 1574, along with its counterpart across the piazza, though these statues were added 300 years later. I did get dinner on the Piazza Navona, which was wonderful. The lasagna was good too. The Piazza Navona is a majestic place. There's some ancient Roman ruins inside a more modern building. This is the Corte Suprema de Cassazione. This magnificent courthouse was built between 1888 and 1910 and is the highest appeals court in Italy. Down the Tiber River is the towering dome of St. Peter's Basilica, designed by none other than Michelangelo. I did go inside St. Peter's and have a separate video on that. I hope you enjoyed this tour and seeing some of Rome's most iconic landmarks. The layers of history in this city is overwhelming. It was such an awesome experience to finally visit in person, though there's a lot more to uncover. Here's the entrance to the Vatican Museums, one of the largest and greatest museums on the planet, but I will not be able to visit on this trip, sadly. So now I am walking alongside the historic Vatican City walls, which were built in the 800s to protect the Holy See. Alright, here's the Piazza San Pietro. And I'm going to be heading into the Basilica. Entry is free, but visitors have to wait in a queue and go through security. I'm here right as they're opening, so the line isn't bad, but any other time in the day expect a decent wait. So, St. Peter's Basilica is the largest and arguably most important church in the world. Here at the historic capital of Catholicism, the Basilica stands at the end of the expansive St. Peter's Square, which is flanked by a colossal colonnade. There is a Swiss guard stationed at that door. These hired Swiss soldiers wear very colorful uniforms and have a history of guarding the Pope. The Basilica was built over the supposed tomb of St. Peter, so this is a very significant location. There was an original basilica on the site that was built by Constantine in the 4th century, but it was torn down around 1500 to make way for this brand new massive basilica, which was finally completed over 100 years later in 1626. The basilica was designed in the Renaissance and Baroque styles by some of the greatest architects and artists of the day. This included Donato Bramante at first, then Raphael. After he died, Michelangelo was appointed as the primary architect, and he is the one most credited for the design of the magnificent dome. Several other architects worked on the basilica following their predecessors as they kept dying off, including the great Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who designed the piazza and curved colonnade. Now let's head into perhaps the most incredible church on earth. Wow, this is awesome. This is what I wanted to see the most here. The Pietà, a masterwork of Michelangelo. This is one of the most famous sculptures in history, showing Mary holding the body of her son after the crucifixion. It is truly a beautiful sculpture. Michelangelo worked on the Pietà from 1498 to 1499. It was commissioned for a French cardinal and ambassador's funerary monument, but now it's one of the first things that one sees after entering St. Peter's Basilica. This is also the only sculpture that Michelangelo ever signed. At one point he heard someone say that it was sculpted by someone else, so he went back and carved his name into the sculpture so no one else would be confused. The Pietà was displayed at the 1964-65 New York World's Fair as part of the Vatican Pavilion. It was shipped over to America in a highly protective crate, and at the fair, Visitors would queue up for hours to pass by Michelangelo's masterpiece on a conveyor belt. Sadly, a few years later in 1972, a mentally disturbed man attacked and significantly damaged the sculpture, hitting it with a geologist's hammer 15 times while exclaiming, "I am Jesus Christ, I have risen from the dead." Mary's right arm, part of her nose, and a section of her eyelid were damaged. It has been restored, which was somewhat controversial, but still that was a horrible thing to happen, and now it is far behind this bulletproof glass window, so visitors can't see it too closely anymore. The Pietà is so amazing to see in real life. That is a fantastic sculpture. The crowds definitely start to pick up within an hour of opening. There are 91 popes entombed inside St. Peter's Basilica, so many of these monuments in the side aisles are papal tombs. A lot of the popes are buried below in the grottos, which we can't visit. Below the altar of St. Sebastian is the tomb of Pope John Paul II. He was certainly a very popular pope who maintained the pontificate from 1978 until his death in 2005. A lot of significant reforms occurred in the Catholic Church during his time, and he was also shot in an assassination attempt outside in the square. Pope Innocent XI was originally buried here, but he was dug up and moved for John Paul II in 2011. The basilica is 615 feet long, with 11 chapels and 45 altars. The sculptures on this funerary monument are great, especially that demonic dragon down there. There's the preserved body of Pope John XXIII, who was Pope from 1958 to 1963. Here is an ancient bronze sculpture of St. Peter. Traditionally, pilgrims would touch his foot. Here's the center of the basilica, where all the towering side aisles converge at the dome, designed by Michelangelo himself, though he didn't live to see it completed. That is the baldacchino directly below the towering dome. The magnificent canopy of gilded bronze atop spiraling columns is a masterpiece of Baroque architecture, one of Bernini's contributions to the basilica. It is 66 feet tall. Below the canopy inside the baldacchino is the papal altar, at which only the Pope can celebrate Mass. It was built of marble from the Forum of Nerva, and has been there since the reign of Pope Clement VIII in the late 16th century. Directly below the baldacchino is the crypt of St. Peter, the supposed burial site of one of Jesus' 12 disciples, who went west and finally to Rome after Jesus' crucifixion, but eventually he himself was crucified near the Circus of Nero, which is where the Vatican stands today. Bones belonging to a 60 or 70-year-old man were found down there, but it's still debated whether those are the remains of Peter. It is possible to actually head up into the dome, which stands 448 feet above the basilica floor. There are great views of Rome from up there, but I'm not going to do that on this visit. The light filtering through the windows is glorious this morning. That is truly remarkable. Here is the altar of St. Jerome, below which is a box containing the remains of St. John the 23rd, another pope whose body was heavily embalmed and preserved. Here's the altar of St. Peter, also known as the altar of the lie, with a painting depicting Sapphira falling to the ground after lying to Peter. This is the monument to Pope Alexander VII, the last work of Bernini. This is the altar of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Here's the altar of St. Leo the Great, which features a marble relief showing Pope Leo repelling Attila and the Huns from attacking Rome. Here's the funerary monument of Pius VIII. I walked a little bit into a hallway that leads to the treasury, but it doesn't seem to be open right now. Here's a big plaque with the names of all the popes. That skull motif is cool. This is the sacristy of St. Peter's Basilica. Here in the chapel of the Presentation of the Virgin Mary, is the tomb of Pope Pius X. He reigned from 1903 to 1914, and his body is preserved in there. The magnitude of this basilica is unbelievable. Certainly the most impressive church I've ever visited. And now we're back out on the Piazza San Pietro. That is the Pope's balcony, where the Pope will sometimes deliver blessings to crowds in the piazza. This square is where throngs of people gather when a new Pope is announced, including when the current Pope Francis first walked down the balcony in 2013. He will still usually read a prayer to people gathered on the plaza most Wednesdays, and performs Mass inside the Basilica on Sundays. At the center of the palazzo is the Vatican obelisk, an ancient Egyptian obelisk that was brought to Rome by Caligula, and it has stood near this spot for nearly 2,000 years. All along the tops of the colonnades, there are 140 statues of different saints and martyrs. Well, it was absolutely incredible to finally see St. Peter's Basilica, certainly one of the most important places in Christendom, and a masterpiece of Renaissance artistry. Starting off here by the Castel Sant'Angelo, which was originally built as the tomb of Hadrian. The popes later used it as a fortress, residence, and jail. Unfortunately, I will not be able to visit the Castel Sant'Angelo today. I'm going to cross the Vittorio Emanuele II Bridge, built in 1886. It has sculptures of winged victory at this end. There's a great view of the Castel Sant'Angelo just down the Tiber River. There is a massive statue of St. Michael atop the castle. I'm walking over to the Piazza Venezia, but first there's some great architecture along the way. Here's a statue of Marco Minghetti, who was Prime Minister of Italy. This is the Piazza Venezia, a bustling historic center of Rome, surrounded by grand palazzos, churches, monuments, and ancient ruins. There's also the Museo delle Cere, an old-school wax museum that unfortunately I will not have time to visit. That is the Victor Emmanuel II Monument, a colossal monument dedicated to the first king of unified Italy. The monument was completed in 1935, right at the base of Palatine Hill, and is a neoclassical masterpiece utilizing lots of ancient Roman techniques, like the Grand Colonnade. King Vittorio Emanuele II of Savoy played a significant role in Italian unification, and became king of the entire nation once the Risorgimento was completed in 1870. So King Victor Emmanuel II has clearly been very popular ever since, as there is a giant equestrian statue of him on the prominently located monument. This monument is also known as the Altar of the Fatherland, and also is home to the tomb of the unknown Italian soldier. I would love to explore this monument more closely. There's also a small museum in there, but not this trip. The Piazza Venezia and Victor Emmanuel Monument are essentially at the center of ancient Rome. There are excavated ruins on the piazza, and behind all of this lies the Forum and Palatine. This is Trajan's Column, a 98-foot tall ancient Roman monument to the Emperor Trajan, erected in the year 113 AD. Trajan's successes during the Dacian Wars, where they reconquered Mysia against the Dacians who had driven the Romans out before, led to the Roman Empire's most extensive borders. The carvings spiraling around the column tell about the Dacia campaigns. The column stands in Trajan's Forum, which opened in the year 112 under the orders of Trajan after the Dacia campaigns. It was the last imperial Roman forum to be built in Rome. Unfortunately, little of this grand forum survived. There was a colossal equestrian statue of Trajan here, along with a basilica and libraries which sandwiched the column. That big structure is Trajan's Markets, one of the most expansive and ambitious features of the Forum. That is actually a reconstruction on the site. It was an ancient shopping center that had about 150 different types of shops. It even had some bars. It is possible to go tour inside the market, but I won't be able to do that this time. Here's a statue of Trajan in front of his market. This is a bronze statue of the great Emperor Augustus. And behind him is the Forum of Augustus. This forum was built in 41 BC, after Augustus's victory over Brutus and Cassius. The Grand Temple of Mars Ultor was located here. And here's a statue of the Emperor Nerva. Across the street on the Via dei Fori Imperiali is the Forum of Caesar. That is the Basilica of Maxentius, the last ancient basilica. And there's the mighty Colosseum. This is one of the most iconic landmarks in the world, certainly the most popular attraction here in the great city of Rome. It is the world's largest amphitheater. Even though it's ancient, it still maintains that title. The story of how this gargantuan amphitheater came to be here in the heart of ancient Rome is fascinating. After the horrific reign of Nero came to an end with his suicide in the year 68 AD, a succession of emperors attempted to take power until Vespasian successfully founded his Flavian dynasty a year later. Now this was the site of Nero's enormous palace, so in the year 70 Vespasian decided that a new public amphitheater should be built atop it, and so this project of unparalleled scale was begun, and it was completed in the year 80, so it just took a decade to build this. The Flavian Amphitheater, as it was then known, was dedicated by the new Emperor Titus, Vespasian's son. The emperor famously opened this Colosseum with 100 days of games, which were wildly popular and attended by thousands of people. Gladiatorial schools were established nearby to train human combatants, while various deadly wild animals were also brought in. It is believed that 9,000 animals were killed during those inaugural games. Right by the Colosseum is the Arch of Constantine. This classic Roman triumphal arch was erected in 312 AD to memorialize Constantine's victory over Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. That battle occurred on the Tiber River in 312, and it's where Constantine supposedly had the vision that caused him to fight for the Christian God, and as a result of his victory he became the sole ruler of the empire, and eventually converted to Christianity. The symbols on this arch attribute the victory to a divine intervention, though there's no Christian symbology on it. Eventually, gladiator fights were banned here in Rome around the year 400, but animal hunts and other events were still held here throughout the duration of the Roman Empire. This structure then saw a variety of different uses during the Middle Ages. It was a family castle at one point, and several religious orders had chapels here, though this massive structure was largely used as a quarry during that time, which is why much of the outer wall of the Colosseum is completely gone now. Actually, parts of St. Peter's Basilica are believed to have been built from the Colosseum. Over the years, different popes tried to turn the Colosseum into a wool factory to employ prostitutes. It was also considered for a bullfighting ring, but it was eventually decided, most likely inaccurately, that this was the site of Christian martyrdom. Luckily, that declaration in 1749 banned quarrying of the stone, so the structure was preserved. Now let's head into the legendary Colosseum. These expansive internal corridors are impressive. They were designed to be large, so that the massive, unruly crowds would have some space to move around and could get to their seats within 10 minutes. Here's a first look at the interior of the Colosseum. Wow, this is a storied place. This cross was placed here in the year 2000 by Pope John Paul II. The plaque on it mentions the impious worship of pagan gods that occurred here. Walking around, I noticed lots of small stone fragments laying around. Now I'm going to try to head up to the second level through these throngs of visitors. There's the view out from the Colosseum. Up here on the top level, there's an exhibit about the Colosseum. These are white marble balustrades and barriers that would prevent spectators from falling down the stairs. Here's an original Corinthian column top. These are stones from different renovations. All the outer wall archways had statues in them. None of them are left, but these may be authentic remnants from those statues. There's a hunting mosaic commemorating a victorious hunter in the 2nd century. These stones have samples of graffiti made by spectators on the seating. Some things never change. These models show the inner workings of the Colosseum. Here are some more excavated relics from the Colosseum. This is a model of what the Colosseum may have looked like if a planned church was built inside the arena. This model shows the extra fortifications that were built when this was a family castle in the 13th century. And here's a restoration model of the Colosseum from the 18th century. It was never restored quite like they planned back then. This colossal freestanding amphitheater is truly an architectural and engineering marvel. The interior of the Colosseum here is arranged in a sweeping ellipse. There was seating for over 50,000 spectators completely surrounding the arena. The seating was largely arranged by social class. Obviously, the emperor would have had his own fancy box. There would have been awnings at the top level of the Colosseum to cover the audience from the dreadful sun. It is extremely hot in here. Most famously, this arena saw hundreds if not thousands of bloody gladiator fights. Men, and sometimes women apparently, would battle for the amusement of the spectators, and sometimes these gladiators would be killed. Most gladiators were prisoners of war, slaves, or condemned criminals, and most would have received training at a gladiatorial school before being thrown into the arena of death. Sometimes these gladiators would become celebrities. They could earn money, and some ended up with some pretty nice houses, even though they were usually not free men. Gladiators often would not die in battle. As much as 1 out of 5 matches may have ended in deaths, but that number is probably less, and those incidents were often accidents. but human beings still brutally died down there in an amusing spectacle. The millennia of general abandonment allowed for nature to take its toll on the Colosseum, so all the original marble seating and nearly all the original decorative elements were destroyed. The arena floor is gone now, though there is a reconstructed section over there, so you can see where it was and what it looked like. It was just a wooden floor, but for gladiator matches and hunts, it would have been topped with a thick layer of sand. There were trapdoors below the sand where men and animals would have been raised directly into the arena. There were some pulley elevators that led to the trapdoors. As mentioned, there were also lots of animal fights in here. They would have brought in all sorts of exotic and dangerous animals like lions, and usually they would be hunted and killed. Or sometimes they would kill the hunter. One of the most unique events that may have taken place here were sea battles. During the 2nd century, the arena was flooded for mock naval battles to take place. That would have been awesome to see, though I guess it isn't confirmed to have happened. I can't help but think of the fantastic film Gladiator while I'm here. That film does largely take place here at the Colosseum, though it was filmed elsewhere. And since I am here, I have to pass judgment and give a thumbs down. Though apparently that wasn't a real thing. Back down on the floor level, I'm going to explore a little more where these rather unethical events took place. Clearly visible below the floor level are all the underground rooms where animals were kept. All that was excavated in the 19th century, and clearly there was a labyrinth of rooms and passageways. It is possible to go down there, but on special guided tours that cost more, so I didn't do that on this visit. I think visitors need a special ticket to go out on the wooden floor. While the Colosseum was built on the site of Nero's palace, they did not destroy the Colossus of Nero, a 98-foot tall statue of the sociopathic emperor. The Colossus is probably where the name Colosseum came from. They actually moved the statue right next to the amphitheater, and it stood there for some time, but it was reported to be destroyed in the 4th century, unfortunately. Notice that there is a fresco on that arch. It depicts a view of Jerusalem, painted in the 17th century. Alright, we have exited the Colosseum. That was absolutely amazing. I had to wait for about 15 minutes to get water from the Colosseum water fountain. I did eat lunch at a nearby restaurant called Osteria al Gladiatore, which has some cool murals of gladiators. And they had some good lasagna. So that was an incredible experience to see and go inside the mighty Colosseum. It is such a legendary historic landmark through the historic Roman Forum and Palatine Hill, which contain what remains of the former capital of the Roman Empire. The Foro was the political and commercial heart of the ancient city, and this large archaeological park preserves the ruins of it, which are very little compared to what once stood here. This is the Arch of Titus. This classic Roman triumphal arch was built in the year 81 AD by Domitian after the death of his brother Titus. It also celebrated the success of Titus and his father Vespasian in putting down the Jewish rebellion that led to the fall of Jerusalem a decade earlier. The interior of the archway has panels depicting the Roman siege of Jerusalem. This is the original arch that served as inspiration for the various other triumphal arches built around the world, such as the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. There are some pretty great views in the Forum, and there are plenty of churches visible, as they were built directly over top this vile pagan metropolis. There are some water fountains here at the Forum, which is nice, especially since it's a scorching 105 degrees today. As this was the central marketplace and political center of Rome, 2,000 years ago this place would have been bustling. Even though these are primarily just partial ruins dating back to that era, they were parts of some magnificent structures. This was the site of Vespasian's warehouses, which Domitian turned into another shopping market. Palatine Hill, which will ascend soon, looms above the Forum from the south. That is the Church of Santa Francesca Romana. These foundations were probably part of Nero's Domus Aurea. A part of the palace still stands nearby. It was as big as Nero's ego. The brick structure with massive archways is the Basilica of Constantine and Maxentius, the largest building at the Forum. It was built around 312 AD, and it was the last great basilica built in Rome. A Roman basilica was a political building. It would have served as a courthouse and meeting chamber. Back in the ancient heyday, a variety of court cases would have been held inside these basilicas. These are the remains of the portico of a medieval house. I'm currently along the road leading to Carina, one of the oldest routes in Rome. This is the Temple of Romulus, originally built in the 4th century AD to deify Romulus. No, not the founder of Rome, but the son of Maxentius. Luckily, this temple was saved because it was enveloped by a Christian basilica in the 6th century. Inside the ancient temple is the archaeologist Giacomo Boni's hot air balloon. And sadly, my DSLR camera of 4 years took its last shot in here. It permanently broke, and I didn't bring my other camera with me today, so I gotta use my iPhone for the rest of the video. This is the temple of Antoninus and Faustina. The Baroque church maintains the porch of a Roman temple from the year 141, which is kind of an odd sight. It is believed that St. Lawrence was condemned to death at this location. The scattered statuary, column remnants, and tombs throughout the Forum are really awesome. So this is the original Roman Forum. However, as the city's population boomed, there needed to be expansions. So Julius Caesar built a new Forum nearby in 46 BC, and other emperors continued to build more, including Augustus, Trajan, and Nerva. Those forums can be viewed from above, and I did take a peek at some of those ruins in my Roman landmarks video. These are the remains of the Basilica Aemilia, a public hall that had lots of shops along its 100-meter facade. The ancient playwright Plautus wrote about the Forum that it was teeming with, quote, lawyers and litigants, bankers and brokers, shopkeepers and strumpets, and good-for-nothings waiting for a tip from the rich. This is what remains of the Temple of Caesar, which was erected by Augustus in memory of Julius Caesar in 29 BC. Back here are the remains of the altar of Julius Caesar, which was where his body was cremated after his assassination in 44 BC. Now, cremation in such a prominent location was unusual, and the event was certainly politically charged, as Julius Caesar was successfully deified by his successor Octavian, later to be known as Caesar Augustus. So this is basically the grave of Julius Caesar. Here are some of the most beautiful ruins at the Forum. The Temple of Vesta. Though partially reconstructed in the 1930s, it shows what the circular temple was like. It was used by the cult of the Vestals, one of the oldest and most exclusive cults in Rome. Only 6 virgin priestesses belonged to it at a time. This is the Fontana di Juturna, one of the oldest and most important natural springs in Rome. Those 3 columns were part of the Temple of Castor and Pollux. Between these ruins is the Oratorio de 40 Martiri, an 8th century oratory that has some very faded frescoes inside. Here at the base of Palatine Hill is the Church of Santa Maria Antica, which was built in the 5th century, and is the oldest original Christian site here at the Roman Forum. There are lots of surviving frescoes inside. That is Santa Maria Regina, the oldest surviving Roman depiction of the Virgin Mary as a queen from the 6th century. They use modern lighting methods to highlight parts of the frescoes. These are some incredible Christian icons inside this ancient church, which appears to incorporate even more ancient ruins of pagans. This is a monumental structure. These are the remnants of the Basilica Julia, which was originally built in 46 BC, but was rebuilt after a fire that ravaged the Forum in 283 AD. A lot of the buildings and temples here were rebuilt over the centuries. Under all that scaffolding is the Column of Focus. Here is another classic triumphal arch, the Arch of Septimius Severus. It was erected in 203 AD in commemoration of the 10th anniversary of Septimius Severus's rule. The relief panels on it depict scenes of the emperor's exploits in Parthia and Arabia. Septimius also had 2 sons, whose names were carved on the arch, but one brother murdered the other, and then had his name erased from the arch. Apparently during the Middle Ages, this arch was half buried and served as the shelter for a barber shop. These are the ruins of the Temple of Saturn, some of the best in the Forum. It was built in 380 AD, but a temple to the god Saturn has stood at this spot since around 500 BC. And next to it is a surviving corner of the Temple of Vespasian and Titus. This is the portico of the Harmonious Gods. This is the backside of the Forum on the slope of Capitoline Hill, atop which stood some very important Roman temples which are now gone, replaced with a Renaissance-era palazzo and museum complex designed by Michelangelo. Now with the very limited time I have left, I'm gonna head up onto Palatine Hill. Atop the hill are the Farnese Gardens. The garden was created in the 1550s by the wealthy Farnese family. This was the first private botanical garden in Europe. Wow, there are some amazing views from up here. There's an aerial view of the Colosseum, which was built just down the road from the Forum. And here's a full view of the Roman Forum and Capitoline Hill. According to legend, this is the hill upon which Romulus and Remus were raised by a wolf in a cave, and there is evidence from the Iron Age to suggest that people were living up here in the 9th century BC. Palatine was primarily a high-end residential district. Some very wealthy and legendary Roman figures lived up here. Augustus was born atop this hill and lived here throughout his life. His residence is still standing. The great orator and politician Cicero lived up here. Unfortunately, I don't think there are any surviving ruins of his house. There is a labyrinth of ruins up here, and the park is going to close soon, so I certainly won't see everything. All of this is the Domus Flavia, the remains of a grand palace built by the Emperor Domitian in 81 AD. He was the third emperor of the Flavian dynasty. Of course, the Colosseum was originally known as the Flavian Amphitheater, so they were very powerful and wealthy. The Domus Flavia had two wings. One was the official palace, while the other part was known as the Domus Augustana and was for private use by the family. This room here was known as the audience chamber. It would have been massive and highly decorated, as it was where people would have an audience with the emperor. Here are the ruins of the Temple of Apollo and the portico of the Danaids. The temple was dedicated in 28 BC. This area is known as the Augustan Sanctuary and Residential Complex. It was a late Republican neighborhood with lots of fancy aristocratic houses. This is the House of Livia. a surviving well-preserved house where Augustus lived with his wife Livia for a time. Here are some very old cisterns from the 6th century BC. These are some old service rooms from a big house. These are the excavated remains of the Temple of Victoria, which was built in 294 BC. This is an Iron Age hut village, which has long been believed to be the remains of the village founded by Romulus after murdering his brother Remus. I was really hoping to go inside the House of Augustus, but they closed it early. Dang it. This was the Temple of Magna Mater. While there's a lot more to see here at Palatine Hill and the Roman Forum, they are now kicking everyone out. So there's plenty more to see on a future visit. Anyways, it was incredible to see the ruins of ancient Rome. These are some incredible monuments left over from one of the greatest ancient empires in history. The Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Mazzini stayed in this house. He was a big proponent of Italian unification. This is the Piazza Miganelli, part of the Piazza di Spagna. At its center is the Column of the Immaculate Conception. It's a giant column from the 1800s, topped by a statue of the Virgin Mary. She is holding a real wreath of flowers. They are offered annually by the firefighters of Rome. This is the Palazzo di Spagna, technically the oldest embassy in the world. Spain's embassy to the Holy See was created in 1640 and has been in here since 1647. These are the Spanish Steps, one of Rome's most iconic spots. This large stairway was built in the 1720s. The funds for the Spanish Steps were actually donated by the French diplomat to the Holy See, so that there was a grand way up to the French church at the top. Towering above the Spanish Steps is the Trinità dei Monti, which is still owned by France, and it was built in the late 16th century. The Salestiano obelisk stands in front of the church at the top of the steps. It is not Egyptian, it is Roman, constructed during the reign of Aurelian in 270 AD, and it originally stood at the Gardens of Sallust, which aren't too far from the Piazza di Spagna. Directly alongside the Spanish Steps is the Keats Shelley House. This was the final home of the famed British poet John Keats, who died in this house in 1821 at the age of 25. He moved down to Rome because he contracted tuberculosis. Unfortunately, the climate didn't save him. This house is now a museum about British Romantic poets, including Percy Shelley, who drowned near Rome in 1822 at the age of 29. They are both buried in Rome's Protestant cemetery. The Spanish Steps are pretty neat, though I wish I could have gone into the church and the Keats house, but we'll see those another time. Now I'm heading to another quintessential landmark of Rome. This is the Trevi Fountain, a massive and glorious Roman fountain. This Baroque-style fountain was designed by the architect Nicola Salvi, who won the design competition. Well, actually, he didn't win. A Florentine won the contest, but Romans didn't like that, so it was awarded to Salvi. Still, he definitely had a great design, though he died halfway through the construction of the fountain. Work started on it in 1732, and it was completed in 1762. It is a colossal fountain, with a facade appearing like a Roman triumphal arch. There is a large statue grouping on the rocky fountain, called the Taming of the Waters. At the center is Oceanus, in Greek mythology the guide to Triton. He stands on a shell chariot being pulled by hippocamps. Oceanus is flanked by abundance and salubrity. This location was originally the terminal of the ancient Aqua Virgo aqueduct, built during the reign of Augustus. It channeled water to a brand new bathhouse built back in 19 BC. This fountain has made appearances in several films, perhaps most notably the 1960 La Dolce Vita by the great Federico Fellini. The relief panel on the right side of the fountain shows a girl named Trivia, likely the fountain's namesake, who, according to legend, showed a natural spring to thirsty Roman soldiers that was over 22 kilometers from the city itself. Gonna get my water refill here. There is a tradition that if a visitor throws a coin into the fountain, that they will return to Rome, so that's what I'm going to do because I definitely want to return. Several times, just to be sure. About 3,000 euros are thrown into this fountain by tourists every day. But hopefully that was money well spent. I got dinner near the fountain at Isle Chianti Veneria, and had some exquisite lasagna. I've gone full Garfield mode here in Rome. I hope you enjoyed this look at the Spanish Steps and the Trevi Fountain. If you did, then please like the video, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Also take a look at my other videos featuring historic landmarks, museums, natural wonders, and more, other places in Italy, and across Europe and America. There are some other Rome videos linked in the description. Thanks for watching.